Hello, Midnight TCG members. This is Midnight Fox, and we're coming to you with this week's Competitive Edge podcast. We're picking up where we left off last week, going over meta decks. This week we have Genzaki recording. We have Eddie Phoenix kind of listening in the background. This week we have myself speaking, Genzo,
Hello?
and Keo.
Morning.
And, well, yeah, it is morning in Australia.
Afternoon.
We've all picked kind of meta decks that we want to go over, kind of give you an idea of what are some of the power cards in the deck, what are some basic builds, what's some good tech against it, and then we figured we kind of finish it off with maybe some decks we've been fiddling around with a little ourselves. So, first of all, we're going to start off with Genzo, and he's going to be talking to us about a new contender to being a meta deck in Fire Fist. So take it away, Genzo.
Okay. Firefish should be a deck that you are all kind of hearing about and or have some understanding about. They just got released in Cosmo Blazer. And now we'll just take a look at some of the main monsters and then go from there. First you have the kind of monster that really makes the deck, which is Bear. And his effect is once per turn, when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can set one fire formation spell card directly from your deck. And then once per turn, you can send one face-up fire formation spell or trap card you control to the graveyard to target one monster on the field and destroy that target. So, just in his effect, we get the kind of idea of what all the Fire Fists kind of offer, which is this makeshift tutoring ability, where you can dig cards out of your deck, and versus sending them to your hand, you play them right to the field. And if you haven't already activated one of those cards of that name, you can activate it in main phase 2 or whatever the case may be. The deck offers lots of attack boosts in the forms of spells and traps, and then the monsters use those spells and traps once their effects have been used up to gain more advantage or just be simple utility. So we also have Gorilla, who is like kind of the reverse of Bear, where Bear can use formation spell or to destroy a monster. Gorilla can use a fire formation spell or trap to destroy spell or trap on the field. So just in those two monsters, you can affect the two most important things in the game: your opponent's monster field or their spell and trap zone. So that's pretty good. The difference in Gorilla from Bear is Bear has to inflict damage to add the fire formation to your field. Gorilla has to destroy a monster. So Bear between the two is obviously the better because he just has to deal damage, which is much easier than destroying a monster if you think about it, because attack values and defense values come into play. I'm not going to talk about many of the other Fire Fist monsters because they're not relevant at the moment, but I would like to touch on Dragon. His effect is once per turn, if you activate a fire formation spell or trap card, except during the damage step, you can set one fire formation trap card directly from your deck. So we'll stop there for a second and say Bear and Gorilla give us access to our spells, our fire formation spells. Dragon is the one card you'll probably run at this moment that will give you access to the traps, like Pensu and Tinkin. But on with this effect, once per turn, you can send two face-up fire formation spell or trap cards you control to the graveyard to target one Fire Fist monster in your graveyard, except Dragon, and special summon that target. So he has some utility as well. Now we want to talk about the cards that kind of, how do you say, change for player preference. First, we have the Vanilla Beat Rabbit engine, which is Gene Warwolf, and or Vorse Raider. Some decks run both. Some decks only run one of each. It just depends on, again, on the player's preference and what their goal is, what gimmick they want to attack you with. We all understand how Rescue Rabbit can help solidify uh, a large number of decks, as you'll find out from Fox's section a little later, more geared just to Rabbit. But again, Rabbit's such a great tool, you can add it into this deck and get worth out of it. Obviously, Warwolf is a 2,000 attacker, so if you draw him, he's not as bad as drawing as, say, Cabazals or Sabersaurus, because he and him by himself can attack over a Thunder King Ryo, which Thunder King Ryo shuts down your ability to tutor, adding those cards from your deck to your hand. Which isn't as relevant, but he can also affect your Ixie summons. Vorse Raider, why would the player run Vorse Raider? Well, Vorse Raider gives the deck a really awesome gimmick that affects the overall best deck at the moment, which is Wind Up. You run Vorse Raider, activate a Fire Formation Tinky, which allows you to add a Beast Warrior level 4 lower from your deck to your hand. And now Vorse Raider already has 2,000 attack because of that 100 attack boost that Fire Formation Tinky gives Beast Warriors. So now you have a deck devastation target, and you effectively can eliminate monsters like Wind Up Rabbit, Wind Up Rat, Shark, Magician, Rescue Rabbit, Tour Guide, Sandgan, Effect Veiler, Maxi. The list goes on for decks that are played right now and the cards that they run. The second engine I want to talk about is the Gladiator Beast engine. And this would involve you running Rescue Rabbit, of course. And then Gladiator Beast Andal. He's 1900 vanilla. But what's cool about him, and the aspect that Rabbit offers the Fire Fist deck with him, is you still run 2 Rescue Rabbits, although you only have 3 targets. But once you activate Rescue Rabbit to summon the 2 Andals, you contact Fusion by returning them to the deck to special summon Esadari, which does 2 things. You have a 2,500 attack beat stick on the field, which is a great presence play, but also because you had to return those 2 Andals back to the deck, your second Rescue Rabbit is live. So that's pretty good in and of itself.
Well, what I like in that build too is even if they get rid of Esadari, you can always use Darius to bring it back.
Well, I don't think I would suggest running too much of the Gladiator Beast unless you're going to be running a Gladiator Beast deck kind of teched out with Tinky and maybe 1 or 2 Baron Gorilla. But for the Fire Fist deck itself, the only Gladiator Beasts you're probably running are Andal and Esadari. But the last normal monster I want to talk about that Rescue Rabbit can dig out of the deck is Ninkindog. He's a level 4 wind with 1,800 attack. And the only reason why you would run him is if your preference would have you wanting Lightning Chidori in the extra deck. So that covers it for the Rabbit aspect. But now we'll talk about a few other monsters that you could, add into the deck depending on your preference. And I'm going to go through a list real quick and then just touch on them right after. We have Beast King Barbaros, Reborn Tengu. Those are probably the 2, I guess you should say, flavor cards that you would see the most. Beast King Barbaros, obviously, he can be a 3,000 attacker, but he gets all the benefits that the Fire Fist Beast Warriors get from those spells and traps, especially when you think about Horn of the Phantom Beast. It works with him. And then Reborn Tengu, he's a floater that also gives you access to Lightning Chidori.
I think the other thing I like about you mentioning Barbaros is if you decide to take your Fire Fist deck and side into a Skill Drain variant, he also offers that tech ability.
Yes. which is really solid because you won't have to work so hard for that 3,000 attack value. But fire formation spells. We already touched on Tinky as I was rambling through the monsters there. But basically, it's probably the most important card in the deck. It tutors all the Fire Fist to your hand. If for some reason you wanted one of the vanillas, it'll grab that too. It also grabs Reborn Tengu if you're running that variant. And then the 100 attack it gives can seem smaller than it really is, but it's beneficial at some points.
It's beneficial not only to give the 100-point boost, but also the other thing the Fire Fist monsters do is they boost as well, and they have like traps. Trying to remember the exact one that I'm thinking of that gives a 700-point boost. And then everything, yeah, Tensu, and then everything else stays plus 300. So you have the ability to take these guys that may start off looking small, and that little 100 may seem very small, but when you add all of the boosts you get from it, and you add the tech ability of being able to get rid of your spell and trap zone and gain effects from it, I've noticed a lot of the newer decks like Spellbooks and the Fire Fists, Madolchis, things like that, being able to get rid of your spell and trap zone and Noble Knights to gain effects, which is a pretty interesting aspect to add into the game. You know, for the most part, the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Has just been using your spell and trap zone to get what you need at a certain time. But adding the tech ability of having monsters gain effects from your spell and trap zone, or having tech options come out of your spell and trap zone by using a certain type has made the game a little more interesting and given more tech options and people having to use their brains more. I hate to say that, but there are some people who just go in and you have your autopilot decks that you just go in, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and okay, well, my opponent just said, okay, I'm done, I give up. There are those autopilot decks, but the way Konami's been taking some of these, I like the way they're using the spell and trap zone to add tech options instead of having it all be the monsters.
Yeah, but I guess the last important point to mention about Tenki, which, you know, I'll say it now so I don't have to say it later, because it applies to all the spells and traps that are the fire formation type, is that, like Ben said, those small attack boosts can wind up adding up as the game progresses. But also, I guess the most important thing outside of their immediate effect is the fact that they're fodder for the Fire Fist monsters' effects to use them as utility for destroying spells and traps and so on and so forth.
And it's
it's
rodents. Like Tinky is a Rhoda for Beast Warriors.
Yeah. And it's probably the best tutor the game has seen since Rhoda, in my opinion.
I agree.
It's also a good bait for Mystical Space Typhoon, because Mystical Space Typhoon can negate effect. Not negate, destroy it and make it resolve without effect.
Yes.
So, yeah, it all depends on where you're wanting to go with the deck, but you can make your opponent waste resources to get rid of things and still gain something from them using up a resource. Because
we'll say this, like, you won't be forcing your opponent to use an MST on Tinky. You're actually going to dread that if it happens. Because an MST on a Tinky could mean game over for you. Because you're going to run such a low monster count that being able to get to that bear or gorilla ASAP is key. Like, I was going to touch on that in the playing against Fire Fist section, but now that you mention it, I can go ahead and say it now. Like, MST hitting Tinky is very good for the opposing player.
Yeah, that was probably going to be my. As far as teching against Fire Fists, honestly, it's not the monsters that are the problems. To me, your best tech against them is things that limit what the spell and trap area can do. Like, probably the best deck to play against them, in my opinion, that I've seen playing against Fire Fists has been Six Sams because of the spell and trap control. I mean, really, that's the best way to control, to me, that I've seen. You probably have some more views on it, but the best I've seen as far as being able to control a game playing against Fire Fist has been playing Six Sams. Because they rely so heavily on that spell and trap zone to do their thing, their rota, their attack point boosts, their spell and trap destruction, monster destruction. Just their whole engine revolves around that. For teching against it.
I mean, unless you open Naturia Beast with 6 Sams aren't a real problem. I mean, because Xian's only going to be able to stop one. But if Xian's on the board, you're going to know that he can stop the real play that you want to go through. So,
or your players who run Great Shogun Xian. Either one of those. If they get into Naturia Beast or Great Shogun Xian along with Legendary Six Samurai, then you're in trouble, but yeah.
Yeah, but in the gentleman's handshake kind of world where I sit down with what I consider one of the best options to run, you're going to be sitting across from a guy and hoping he feels the same way. You know, it makes the game more of a calculation, but yeah, that random Shogun Xian would suck. But anyway, let me get to finishing this deck. Fire Formation Tensu. It's pretty much the double summon of the deck, and it gives the deck access to some pretty key plays. Like, if you already have an existing monster, there's your Shockmaster play. It gives you the utility plays like Papal Operative, Black Ship of Corn, Diamond, Direwolf, you know, when you have no monsters on the board. So it's pretty good, and again, it just gives you that 100 attack boost and sits on the field waiting for a Fire Fist to use it. The traps, I'm a little less of a fan of than a lot of people who play the deck. Tinkin is like the Forbidden Lance, but I've just not been sold on this card, even though I have players who I trust tell me that they like it. I just think it's probably, out of the four, it's the biggest preference choice.
In my opinion, Tensu's probably the best one out of all the traps. Outside of that, I am not a huge fan of the rest of the traps that go with the Fire Fist deck type. Tensu's not the only one I've seen.
Tensu's the spell.
Is it?
You're talking about Tensen, I think. Right? That gives us a 700 attack boost?
Okay. They sound so close to each other.
Yeah, they
do. But I would say even that only at maybe one, because otherwise you're going to run into some dead draws with it. But,
agreed.
Yeah. No.
But yeah, so Tensen, as been just stated, is the trap that gives you the 700 attack boost to one Beast Warrior type monster. But while it stays on the field, it gives all Beast Warrior type monsters a 300 attack boost. So while, again, I feel like Ben, where I probably wouldn't run this as a 3 of, it does merit running at 1 or 2 because of the possible explosive attack you can put on the field in the damage step, which is really important as well. Let's see, we have Horn of the Phantom Beast, and I'm not going to talk about that. That should be common sense at this point. You know, 800 attack to Beast Warrior type monsters, draw cards, nothing needs to be said. Starlight Road is kind of an important card, and if you're not a fan of Starlight Road, maybe you're a fan of The Huge Revolution is Over. Either or, they both offer the same protection that the deck will wind up needing, because they put, or that, I don't know, like their inherent abilities force you to commit, and it's not a choice really, as much as a deck that just has cards that can play when they want. Um, Onto the extra deck, you of course have Tiger King. His effect is when this card is Ixie summoned, you can set one Fire Formation spell or trap card directly from your deck. Once per turn, you can detach one material from this card, and you can negate the effects of all face-up effect monsters currently on the field except Beast Warrior type monsters until the end of your opponent's turn. When this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can send 3 face-up Fire Formation spell or trap cards you control to the graveyard, and special summon 2 level 4 or lower Beast Warrior type monsters with the same attack from your deck and face-up defense position. So, that's a lot of an effect, first off, but he does what the Fire Fist monsters do by grabbing a Fire Formation spell or trap from your deck and set it, but just in his effect alone, you see it can grab the spell or the trap, whichever one is more game state appropriate. And then his effect to detach a material and negate all the fields or all the effects on the field except Beast Warriors, that can be good, especially if you're facing Spirit Reaper, which your opponent is using it to try and hold you off and build up resources. So there are a lot of neat aspects to this guy. He's got 2200 attack, seems kind of low, but again, when you add in all the attack modifiers that this deck can run, you can see how this guy can be a real problem to an opponent. Diamond Direwolf just seems like it was built for this, because whereas most decks that would run this would have to use himself to destroy a card, he has plenty of cards on the field he could use that are naturally in the deck. Other than that, I'd say the extra deck stays pretty rank 4 oriented. There are decks that are Fire Fist decks that run Tour Guide from the Underworld, and so they will have access to like Zen Mains, Tempo, Leviair, stuff like that. But the majority of the deck will be your 1 Stardust Dragon and then 1 to 2 Abyss Dweller. You should keep that in mind because your Mermail match is going to be a tough match. And then just all the other rank 4s in the game that you find applicable.
I think, as far as rank 4s, if you're going to go on Zen Mage, you have to go on the flip side. With your 4s, you have to at least have Maystroke in there.
Yeah,
Zen
well,
Mage is your 3-star, and Maystroke is your 4-star, negate destruction, along with Stardust Dragon. I mean, that's become an important aspect to the game.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned every other generic rank 4.
Yeah.
Because it is, at this point, not a tech card. It's like if you can run a rank 4 producing deck, Maestro's going to be there.
Yep.
But I really don't think there's any crazy tech from the extra deck. So if if you're ready to get on to how to play against the deck, we can start that.
Let's get into that.
Okay, well, I'm going to name off some cards, not all of them, just in little groupings, and then let you guys bounce your ideas off. But the first 3 that you could use to play against Fire Fist are Effect Veiler, Ally of Justice Catastor, and Maestro the Symphony Djinn. My reason for Effect Veiler would be if they have Bear or Gorilla on the field, they pay its cost by sending one of their spells or traps to the grave. Then you Effect Veiler. Well, they're out of that 1 card to use again, and also they lose the attack boost from it, but now they have no effect as well. So it's an obvious choice.
I'm going to toss in along with your Effect Veiler, and I'm going to keep plugging this card because it's starting to look better and better. Breakthrough Skill.
No.
Your trap version of Effect Veiler.
No.
No.
I have to throw it in there because he's
Only if you run Microcosmo.
Well, I don't think of that because what I think Breakthrough Skills' real playability is not so much its field presence, it's graveyard presence. It's removal from the graveyard. The only thing I like about Effect Veller over Breakthrough Skill is its Chaos Food. But
Well, there's just some
also-
things that are kind of counterintuitive, though, because like the game at this moment, right now, the decks that are having success, excuse me, there's so many decks that run Dimensional Fissure and or Macrocosmos as options, and so like the real selling point of Breakthrough Skill is the graveyard effect, because sure, it's nice that you're going to negate a monster, from the field, but if I'm just looking at the card there, I like Valor better. Does it bait out an MST? No, but MST is going to be something you have to deal with in the game anyway. So, like, is it a side deck card? Because if it is, if you're running a deck that's hurt by Macrocosmos, it's a dead side deck card. If it's in the main deck, it's probably only value right now is the main deck play, actually, now that I think about it. Like, have you tried siding it?
Breakthrough Skill is my side card. I don't main it right now because
See, I wouldn't suggest that to anyone, though. Like, in my opinion, you have to main deck that card or don't run it. Like, I can't get it from the side deck. I just can't understand that.
but you said Veller.
Oh, Catastor and Maestro. Like,
Right.
Catastor, he only loses to a boosted Vorse Raider. And that's if the player is running Vorse Raider. And if we look at the list from Dueling Network or the YCS this weekend, the guy only ran 3 Vorse.
I flip face down.
Exactly, detaching them from all the attack boost makes them much easier to get over. And then for spells, Forbidden Lance, again, like we talked about earlier, Mystical Space Typhoon, and then Royal Decree. I think MST and Decree are kind of obvious, but Forbidden Lance can help you win the damage step war. It's a great mirror match card, and like if you're playing Macro Rabbit, it's great for Macro Rabbit to have Forbidden Lance to disconnect in the damage step.
I'm going to go on a limb here, and this is this is another up and coming deck type that's good tech against Fire Fist, and this is basically if you run spellbooks, teching Secret Village into the build helps shut down the Fire Fist decks as well, because
That's actually quite interesting.
since they run so heavily on Beast Warriors, if you're running a spellbook deck, and I've been working on one where I run the Grand Spellbook of Tower in the main deck and side deck Secret Village just for Fire Fists, because they are so spell dependent. It is a good tech choice, but it does kind of limit exactly. It goes into limiting what you can play, because Secret Village depends on spellcasters. So you're pretty much stuck. If you want to stay high meta, you're stuck with running spellbooks. There are the anti-meta versions looking at maybe running like Kaikus and Breakers and counter spellcasters, but they're not as fast as spellbooks.
No.
The spellbook deck is becoming quite deadly, quite fast, and especially if you pull 2 High Priestess of Prophecy into hand, you can use her effect, and then you got an instant number 11 Big Eye by overlaying the 2. And that's still a spellcaster, so you still have Secret Village of the Spellcasters available as an option. That's just a tech card I want to throw out there, considering Spellbook and Prophecy is really starting to become a much huger deck, having more of an impact on the game. That is a good tech choice to look at if you don't main it, side it. Because
Exactly, like, the deck's not there just yet. As far as Prophecy, it's probably still got a little while to go before it actually starts competing at its highest. But that is great because if you run that in your side deck and you side it in for your Fire Fist mirror match, it forces them to have Effect Veiler and summon it, or just be shut down for quite a while and possibly lose the game because of it. That's interesting.
Because, yeah, I mean, you got Spell Canceller as an option, but he's too low of an attack. He's a tribute monster.
Yeah.
He's going to get run over. Your best tech is playing a Spellbook deck and playing Secret Village in your side deck for running against those Fire Fists, because I'd say those are probably your two quickest swarming. Spellbook isn't quite there, but with Cosmo Blazer giving more support, and we're supposed to, I think, get one or two more support cards in Judgment of Light.
Yeah.
Spellbook, I think, is really where Konami's going with spellcasters. So Secret Village is going to be a good tech card against the Fire Fist Archetype.
For sure. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit before they get to their tip-top performance level. But again, maybe Fire Fist won't even be relevant then. So, but right now, if you're a Prophecy player, that's a pretty cool idea. Definitely.
You know the Fox, I'm always thinking outside the box.
And to round out my discussion, I just have two more cards. You could call it three, maybe, that I want to touch on for playing against the Fire Fist deck. And they're a little more gimmicky. Well, at least one of them. But they're thoughts nonetheless, just like the Secret Village. The first is Tsukuyomi. Just because it could flip the monsters down. Granted, the reason why Tsukuyomi maybe not your safest bet is because its attack isn't big enough to get over some of the monsters you'll be flipping down. But if you have a board set up already with, say, your own 1900 attacker, Tsukuyomi could be lethal. And then the last one card, but it's actually two, would be Macrocosmos and Dimensional Fissure, because they're so meta relevant right now anyway. They don't hurt the deck as much as you would like, but because they are meta relevant and so many people are running so many copies, it's good to go ahead and mention that when you have Macrocosmos, I don't know why I'm talking about Dimensional Fissure, sorry. So just Macrocosmos, they can't send those spells to the graveyard. So that utility that they have to destroy your monsters and or speller traps is gone. So Macrocosmos, while it's not going to shut the deck down, it could buy you vital time.
I'm going to flip the script on you there when you talk about Tsukuyomi and mention one other card. Book of Moon.
Oh, yeah.
Quick play spell card, flip them face down, and again, they lose that attack if it's equipped to a monster. Goodbye to the equipped spell. Yeah. Book of Moon, definitely a viable side deck option against Fire Fists.
I'm glad you mentioned it as well, because I was going to end my discussion without mentioning it. But thank you, A. B, it's really important that you mention it, because as you look through the revealed list from the YCS Miami, you will notice that a lot of decks are playing Book of Moon in the main deck, especially the Rabbit variants and Wind Up. It's like they're paying attention to their Fire Fist matchup. So it's good that you mentioned that. Thank you.
We need Magician of Faith back in the current meta.
No, we don't.
Hey,
but
player
that concludes
wish.
it.
We can wish.
Well, yeah. But that's it from my discussion.
With Fire Fists, we're going to move on to Kiel, and he's going to be talking about Dark Worlds.
Hey guys, so Dark World is a very standard build which involve getting Rafa to hand, discarding him, and then summoning him. So I will cover the standard build first, which usually run 3 Rafa, 3 Snow, 3 Dark World Dealing, 3 track down to the Wraith, and the 3 field spell. So with Snow, you can when she was discarded, you can add a Dark War card from deck to hand, which usually either Rafa or a gateway from of the Dark War, or a Dark War dealing, so that you can discard your only in hand Rafa. So there's a lot of build involving Dark War. So the standard build I'm talking about is keep drawing the card, discard Rafa, then summoning Rafa from the graveyard. With the deck, you can add in some attack card like Deck Devastation Virus that can destroy opponent monster that have 1500 attack or less. That's one way to do deck control. Another thing is with Micros, it doesn't matter if you get it right from Micros. That's good. If you get it wrong, you get to discard one random Dark War card from your hand. If those are the only one, and you can get the effect. So, moving on to the how to tech against Dark War. Since these are all dark monster and rely on being discarded from hand to graveyard, Soul Strands is good to go against because all their effect activate in the rave. Microcosmo is also another good thing because the card need to be in the rave so that they can activate the effect. And so moving on to this extra deck, which I should have covered first. Since most of the Dark War decks are running Tour Guide, they have access to all most of the generic rank 3 one. Zenman, Lavier, Acid Golem, and since Rafa is a level A monster, you also have access to rank 8, the Helios, which fairly good for field control.
I think
But
Levier is one of the key points to the deck, considering most of your Dark World decks are going to run gates, and you're going to have to remove for it. So Levier is a key card in that engine.
Yep. That's definitely
so the
one of the
choice
key cards.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh. What were you trying to say?
Oh, I was gonna say just that that's one of the key extra decisions you make. Is do I run 1 Levier or 2 Levier? Because as you mentioned, it can be vital in the game. That's all.
Yeah. So that was much about the extra deck. And I did already cover the tech card against Dark War, which is Microcosmo, Soultrain, and Shadow Impression Mirror if you don't run any dark card. Dimensional Freezers is also good. Yeah. Anything else to add in, guys?
I would say Soul Drain.
Yeah, I did mention that.
Soul Drain is definitely a good option against Dark World because you're taking that out of Necro Valley. Necro Valley, Soul Drain.
Yep.
Anything that takes the graveyard out of the equation is good tech against Dark World.
Necro Valley is good only if you have the field control. But the thing is, Necro Valley is a field spell, and Dark World do run field spell, and they just discard Snow from hand to add a field spell, or they just discard Rafa and use Rafa effect in the rave to destroy Necro Valley. So it's not exactly that good against Dark World, in my opinion.
Well, actually, one of the more techie cards. It's an older card that I've been running in my Gravekeeper's build that kind of puts even more of a strain on things is the End of Anubis. Now, Necro Valley doesn't allow you to move things around in the graveyard. The End of Anubis just completely takes the graveyard out of the equation, and at a 1 tribute 2500 attack, he can go toe to toe with the Utopia or most of your 4 and 3 rank Xyz monsters, and he definitely stomps over a Thunder King Ryo. Just a tech option I'd like to throw out there against Dark World. Not every deck's going to see, you're not going to see that in every deck, but if you run a Gravekeeper's build and you're not heavily dependent on that graveyard, which unfortunately a lot of them are, the End of Anubis is a tech card to look at.
Wait, did you say Necro Valley was heavily dependent on the graveyard?
No, if your Gravekeeper build is heavy, like using Steely to
Oh.
back, if you're heavily dependent on your stills to bring things back to your hand, or you at least run your chief to be able to bring, so you can still use your graveyard. If you're still heavily dependent on your graveyard in your Gravekeeper's build, then you're not going to want to run the End of Anubis. But if it's not that important to you, and you've built your Gravekeeper build right, the End of Anubis is a good tech card that's one tribute that does completely shut down the graveyard.
Yeah, okay. So we'll go ahead and say that A, Gravekeeper players, don't run Gravekeeper's Chief. Please, I implore you, don't run that card. B, the only card that your Gravekeeper's deck should have that's requiring the graveyard should be Steel. But I agree that even if you run Steel, it's always going to be as important to the Gravekeeper deck. You should probably still consider End of Anubis, because in the early game, Gravekeeper Steel is a dead card to you, so you're not worried about it anyway. And that's when you would want Anubis, to shut down like Mermail or Dark World from really affecting you in the opening game. Because if you can get advantage in the early game, especially like, say you have End of Anubis and then Royal Tribute, ow, okay.
The End of Anubis
Game over.
has been my tech card of choice. I hope we don't have a whole lot of YF members who were listening to this. That's been my tech in my Gravekeeper's build, because I'm not heavily dependent on my graveyard, and I've went through quite a few duels without ever even using my extra deck just because I run the End of Anubis. It's an easy summon, and it's a high attack monster for one tribute, and the graveyard is a moot point. It's dead.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to keep talking about a deck that's not Dark World at the moment, but just because you brought up an End of Anubis, like, for Monarch players, I'm sure there's still a bunch out there. Whichever variant you're running, End of Anubis is a good side deck choice for you as well. But onto the Dark World deck, I'm just going to mention some names here of cards that I don't think were mentioned. Morphin Jar, Trance Arcfiend, and Fabled Raven. Like, those are all pretty key cards to Dark World in different ways and in different variations. So, Kiyu, what do you think about those three cards in regards to Dark World and how successful they can be?
Morphing Jar, the best one. Because not only you discard your hand, which would consistent of only Dark World, it also refill your hand with cards that you can use against your opponent. And with Fable Raven, since discarding is an effect, not a cost, it's always good for Dark World. And this because Raven, when uses effect, he can change his level from 2 to whatever how many cards you want to discard. So he's also good.
That's the point.
For either synchro summoning or exist summon.
That's what I was going to cover on Raven. Your discard plus he gives you level manipulation.
And he's a Fiend. Also, he got attack boost if you discard card. So
The other good thing about Raven is he's a light, so you can toss in light and dark with your Dark World and your Fabled Raven to be able to run Chaos within your Dark World deck.
yeah. And with Trance Fiends, The only way he could be screwed up is that people mind controlling him and then use him for whatever the reason is. That's the only way to make sure that he not get his effect. Other than that, his effect is awesome. So, because you can discard whatever Dark World you want, and then when he destroy, you can get the Dark World that you have been banished from a gateway to go add to hand, which usually Rafa, because people don't like Rafa in the Rave.
Yeah.
I'm going to honestly say out of the three mentioned, I think Fabled Raven is probably your most relevant of them because he allows you synchro summons, Xyz summons, level manipulation, special summons. You can discard 3 Dark World monsters, take him up to a level 5, and if one of those is, I believe it's gold is the level 5, gold and silver are level 5s, right?
Yep.
If you discard a gold or a silver, and you get rid of 3 cards from your hand, right there with Fabled Raven and gold or silver, you have an overlay into a Tyrus or an Adrius. And pretty soon to come, Freezer Dawn and Volcasaurus, who...
Volcasaurus?
Yeah. The guys who allow you to use other Xyz units and... I'm trying to think of what the other one does. I think it's...
Zen Man? Why up Zen Mile?
Is it Volcasaurus that, darn, I'd have to look that up to be absolutely sure. The one...
Volcasaurus is like a Ring of Destruction.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
the other one, it's, Freezer Dawn, who allows you to drop Xyz units from him instead of, like, Zen Mains or whatever. And he has a pretty decent attack.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad that I mentioned those 3 cards, and it worked out perfectly. Because I said Morphin Jar, Fabled Raven, and Transarch Fiend. What are your thoughts? TU said he felt that Morphin Jar was the best. Ben said he felt that Fabled Raven was the best. And good old disagreeable Genzo is going to say that Transarch Fiend is the best. My argument against Morphin Jar is because I'm an old school player, first and foremost, I am never okay with giving my opponent cards. Ever. For any reason. So that always cuts out Morphin Jar on top of the fact that he's not a fiend. So if he's in the graveyard, he is useless for my gates. Fabled Raven, I like him better than Morphin Jar, but I'm not real worried about synchro summoning. So like if your preference was to have the synchro option in your extra deck, then he would be your choice. I just like Transarch Fiend. Again, he's Fiend. But it makes for easy Steel Swarm Roach plays by discarding Beige. And that's pretty important in my opinion versus certain decks.
Until recently, I wouldn't have said so. But with High Priestess of Prophecy and some of your other higher level monsters, Roach is becoming relevant again. But for the longest time, with everything being reliant on 4, 3s, and 4s, because honestly they were the best Xyz monsters, we haven't seen a whole lot of people running level 5 and 6, so Roach has been dead for a while.
Well, I do want to say that High Priestess is a card effect. That's why Thunder King Ryo can do nothing about her. So Steel Storm Roach would be in the same boat. But as an overall option, I like Steel Swarm Roach. It's just an additional utility for matchups. But last point I want to make on Q's discussion is Heliopolis. I think it's one of the best Xyz monsters to have been released that really adds some depth and explosiveness in a way, and especially when you think it's a 3,000 body, it can destroy cards on your opponent's field. But when I use it, it's often just a connector play. When I hit for 3,000 damage, that's nice. It's all good and well. But the fact that I use it as a connector play, it's kind of weird. But I think, it has to be mentioned that it can be detrimental because of its effect and its size. But it can be used to continue your turn, which is nice. And then, last card I'm going to mention again. I'll make this. I promise. This is my last card. Is Tour Guide. I don't know if TU mentioned it, but the fact
Yeah.
that regardless of what happens to Sangan in this ban list, Tour Guide is still one of the best cards in this deck.
Yep, because you can set out Brow, the Huntsman of the Dark Wall. Which you can usually get back Rafa. Oh, rank 3. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, what about teching against it? Well, I think we did cover most of that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
He
did.
covered that.
Well, I take it that takes it to the Fox, and I'm going to be discussing Dino / Macro Rabbit. They kind of run in together. Of course, the key cards is more along the lines going to be in your Xyz area in Logia and Dolka, but definitely 2 rabbits right now. And your go-to guys within your dinosaurs are Cavazols and Sabersaurus, running 3 copies of each of those. And that's because Sabersaurus is a 1900 vanilla, Cavazols is 1700. They're both 4, so they both go into either Logia or Dolka. The build I actually have up right now, it runs 3 Cavazols, 3 Sabersaurus, 3 Jirac-Guaiba, which is a great searcher for other dinosaurs within your deck. If you're on a budget, we were talking about budget players, Hydrogeddon is a good substitute for that card, but this is the YCS winner in Barcelona, Jack Brun, Bruum. But he runs the 3 Guaiba, 2 Rescue Rabbit, 2 Tour Guides, again, using the Tour Guide engine, 2 Spirit Reapers, Sangan, Night Assailant, which Night Assailant's been dead for forever, but with the Tour Guide engine, Night Assailant is a good option to go into because even if you draw into him, he's good for destruction and not so much for returning a flip effect monster in today's meta. But this guy also ran a Neospacian Grand Mole, which is good because we know that Zenmaines, Maestro, more so Zenmaines being your pain because during the end phase, your opponent gets to destroy something. So being able to bounce, that was a good option in his build. 3 Forbidden Lances, of course, to keep things safe from mirror forces, dimensional prisons, the things that dark holes, things that are going to take out your build. 2 Mystical Space Typhoons, yet more control of that back build. Heavy Storm, Dark Hole, Book of Moon. This was in December. It only ran 1, but I'm sure playing in today's meta, going against like Fire Fist, you'd have probably seen it more at like 2, maybe 3, but I'd probably cap that off at 2. Monster Reborn, 2 Macrocosmos, 2 Dimensional Prison, 2 Fiendish Chains, 2 Bottomless, 2 Torrential, 2 Warnings, a Starlight Road, and a Solemn Judgment. And in the extra deck, you had the 2 Logia, 2 Dolka. Of course, as I said, the big things with Logia and Dolka is field control. Logia, when a monster would be normal or special summoned or a spell or trap card is activated, you can attach 2 of his units and negate the summoner activation and destroy that card. So he gives you the choice of either controlling the field or controlling the spell and trap zone, which control has become key in Yu-Gi-Oh! And Dolka gives you the ability, when a monster effect activates, you can detach an Xyz material from him and negate the activation if you do destroy that monster. So, yet again, monster effects can be lethal in Yu-Gi-Oh! Especially playing against things like Zenmaines. If you don't have things to bounce it back to hands, you know you have to burn through that Zenmaines. So Stoka is one of your stars and being able to stop Finbane's effect from going off. 2 Leviaires, of course, keeping with the engine, bringing things back from out of play. 1 Stardust to go with the Starlight Road. Number 39, Utopia. I don't see Black Ship. That's probably because it hadn't released at the time of this deck list. Photon Papal Operative. You look at that as the ability to take a face-down defense monster. So if your opponent's stalling or what have you, it's a way to put their monster into attack, do some damage, and you also make their monster lose 600 attack. Another good level 4 Xyz monster to look at. Maestroke, again, negating destruction. Gaga Cowboy. Good tech card, that's more along player's choice, but it allows you to boost him by 1,000 if he's in attack, and drop their attack by 500. Or do I got that backwards? But most of your players, regardless, most of your players are using Cowboy for his defense of 2,400 to drop units to do 800 burn damage. Asset Golem, of course, your rank 3 Xyz monster with 3,000 attack. Number 17, Leviathan Dragon, which drop a unit, give them an extra 500 attack, and it stays. We also have Giga Brilliant now. He gives a 300 attack point boost that stays. Tim Tempo, the Percussion Djinn, and Wind Up Zen mains. And then in the side deck, he had 2 Thunder Kings, 2 Snowman Eaters. Thunder Kings, of course, limit draw engines. They're chaos food, and they negate special summons. So Thunder King is an all-in-one good 1900 beater with a good effect. Snowman Eaters with 1900 defense. Once you flip them, you get to destroy a card. Great. Max C's, ran 2 of them in his side deck, which allows you to be able to create a draw engine off of your opponent. 2 Noble Mana Crossouts. 2 Soul Takers. I'm thinking this guy was thinking more along the lines of playing against Chaos Dragons, because although they may have been limited, they're not completely dead. 2 Dust Tornadoes, 1 Mystical Space Typhoon, a Gores, and another Macrocosmos. Of course, as we were talking about, the big thing with like looking at Leviaire is your Macrocosmos and your Dimensional Fissures are going to be removing your monsters. So you're going to need something to bring those monsters back to the field when you're dropping Xyz units, or however you're using your extra deck or what's on your field. You're going to need something to bring them back, and not to mention Leviaire also brings back your Rescue Rabbit to re-abuse. You're playing a mirror match against another person playing Rabbit, then you can bring back even their Rabbit and abuse it. What I like about Rabbit, and depending on whether this list I saw last time ends up being legitimate or not, I think if they're really going to limit Rabbit, they're making the wrong move. What I liked about Rabbit is that they made a type that's been overlooked for so long in normal monsters relevant again. You do have your Dino Rabbits, your Macro Rabbits. The real problem is not Rabbit itself. The real problem within the deck is the Dino Rabbit players who abuse Stoka and Logia. I think if they were looking to hurt that deck type, they needed to look more at they needed to look more at the Dino part of it. I mean, Fire Fists are going to use Rabbit, other deck types, but I've seen a lot of cards come out of retirement just from Rabbit being around. Enchanting Fitting Room. White Elephant's Gift, Common Charity, giving love back to normal types that in limiting Rabbit I think is really going to hurt. What I've liked about Rabbit is you've seen so many variants. There's not just Dino Rabbit, there's not just Macro Rabbit, which Macro and Dino kind of go together, but I've seen Water Rabbit, I've seen people running, including myself, something I was working with, an Exodia Rabbit and a Necros Rabbit. Exodia Necros Rabbit, Wind, every form of every attribute has good monsters to go to that are vanillas. So, depending on if this list turns out legitimate, I could see the hit to Tour Guide because it can create an annoying engine, but I really hate to see a hit to Rabbit because there are so many variants that could come out from that. But, I think I covered most of what revolves around the engine. When you're looking at teching against Rabbit, Effect Velar is definitely your number one choice. Because the first thing your players are going to want to do when they summon that Rabbit is banish it, bring out 2 normal monsters, no matter what engine you're going with. Glad Beast, Dino Rabbit, what have you. First thing they're going to want to do is do that. Well, if you play out the Effect Velar on that, then they're stuck with a little useless 400 attack monster that's not going to be able to do anything for that turn. So they're going to have to waste resources to protect it if they still want to use it, or they're going to have to find a way, like with Pot of Avarice, which I noticed wasn't within this gentleman's build, to recycle that Rabbit into the deck.
Well, Pot of Avarice is probably the card that really only goes with non-macro builds. It's kind of like one of the really clutch cards of the Dino Rabbit area, or era, I should say.
Torrential Tribute. Torrential Tribute, good tech card playing against Rabbit decks because Rabbit decks are very good at swarming. They have not only Rabbit, but most of your Rabbit engines also run the Tour Guide, and some people run Tour Guides in Nidus within themselves. And if you Tour Guide, you've got some really good options to go into with that. So Effect Velar's good tech. Book of Doom. So can't remember. I don't know. I'm trying to think of some. So what? A few Genza. Well, I'm thinking of a few that are evading my mind right now.
You are breaking up really bad, but I didn't hear any of that.
Sam.
Mention a few while I'm trying to think of the other ones I'm thinking of. Right off the top of my head, the 2 that I was definitely thinking of are Effect Velar and Book of Moon. They're going to be your good tech card, and Torrential Tribute. Book of Moon, because you can Book a Moon against a Rabbit. They can't banish it. They can't get an effect to abuse the engine.
Oh, you're asking counters to play against Rabbit?
Counters to play against. What are some?
Oh, okay, there's a lot. You could obviously Maxi when they activate Rabbit's effect because Rabbit's going to special summon the dinos. That's the 1-for-1 play. Then they have to Ixie, so that's your +1. Effect Velar, obviously, because it keeps Rabbit from doing anything. Thunder King Ryo, they have to address Ryo before they can make an Ixie's play. Bottomless Trap Hole to respond to the 2 special summon dinosaurs off of Rescue Rabbit. You have Snowman Eater, which is a great card. Spirit Reaper, since they struggle tactical. You could sit behind a Spirit Reaper for a little bit and build up resources. And then any kind of cards that you can force a Logia negation, because it's not always the most optimal situation to be in, but if you have a Book of Moon and a Dark Hole in hand, you have to play the Book of Moon, because they can't have their guy go face down, so they're obviously going to detach the two materials to prevent that, and then you just Dark Hole the field. Obviously they could have a play in their spell trap zone to prevent anything, but that's just kind of like the general gameplay against Macro Rabbit or any variant of Rabbit. Well, actually more the Dino version, because they're the only builds that are going to bring out the nasty Logia and Dolka combo.
What are your thoughts?
So there's a lot you can do.
Sorry. What are your thoughts on Jinzo or Decree as far as tech options, considering that Rabbit builds are very trap-heavy decks?
Well, I'll say this. Jinzo is probably one of my very first favorite cards, I guess. And no, that's not my name. It's Ginzo. It's not where I got my name, but it is still one of my favorite cards from back in the day. And so I would say this, if you're thinking about Jinzo as an option, and even Royal Decree for that matter, you have to have the right deck for those cards. Like, Jinzo is a tool of the past, in my opinion. Decree, a little more relevant, but if you think about it, Wind Up, Mermail, Fire Fist, all these decks can win against any variant of Rabbit, and they don't run those cards. So I think whenever you're comparing or trying to understand how to beat one of these really strong decks, like Macro Rabbit, is you have to have a good deck on your own. You have to have a understanding of the end results of plays that are built into the deck, and then having key cards at your or having key cards that you can access in your deck, like a Bottomless Trap Hole in the main deck or a Soul Taker in the side deck, and then decision making leads you into beating those decks. Like, again, Decree, it could be nice, but you have to have the right deck for that. So if you're playing Hieratic, sure, Decree would be an excellent choice. But for the majority of competitive upper tier decks, Decree's probably not going to be an option for Rabbit. And in general, it probably won't be a side deck option at all. What do you think, Keo?
Keo?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on siding against Rabbit?
The one that's relevant would be Vanity Emptiness, which prevent summoning. That's one of the options. And the other one would be either Ghost and Match or Rivalry Warlord. Which usually Rivalry Warlord is more relevant than... Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a choice between Gozen and Rivalry. Depends on which deck you're running yourself. It helps you decide which one of those you would run.
What about, there's one other one that I was thinking of, and it's another tech card that's been long forgotten. Imperial Iron Wall as a tech option against Rabbit, because Rabbit is dependent upon being removed.
Yes,
So
it's an option. It's an option, but I'll say this. It's probably a much better option when Rabbit was at 3. Right now, with Rabbit at 2, it could be effective, but you are losing utility. You know what I mean? Like, if your deck is like, say your deck doesn't like to have anything removed. Say you're playing the Dark World deck, since we talked about it today. Maybe Imperial Iron Wall is a good side deck card for you, because you don't want to be hurt by Macro, and in result, you're protecting against Macro and Dimensional Fissure, but you also hurt the Rescue Rabbit. So again, it's just deck choice. What deck you have depends on what card you choose.
So now that we've kind of went through all the decks that we were going to kind of go over. What's some maybe funky decks you've been fiddling around with here lately? Again, we'll start with you. Anything you've been playing that's maybe a little off the wall, maybe meta, but with a twist?
Did you ask me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sure. As far as off the wall decks, probably the Stardust Assault mode. But it's not really developed much at this point. I mean, it's good and it gets Stardust Assault mode on the field on a high percentage. But I would like to mention Constellar and Harpies, because those of you on Midnight TCG who know me, I can be a naysayer at times, especially when it comes to cards that people are just fans of, or archetypes when people are just fans of because of the history. You know, I'm more of a guy who likes to look at a card and or a deck and what it can actually offer. And Constellar is one that I gave a lot of grief to because I can look at the cards without playing them and say, okay, this will be good. I won't give you a 1 to 10 grading because you can never know that. You know, there's very few cards when you see it, you're going to go, this is excellent, period. It's not a 10 on this scale, it's an 11. But I can tell you if it'll be good or not, and I just always had a bad feeling about Constellar. Well, I started writing the discussion for it, and when you're writing an article about it, you have to play it. You have to kind of see the ins and outs of the decks. So I'll say this. In my initial thoughts, for the Harpy deck and the Constellar deck, because I'm doing discussions on both of them, my grading would have been very low if I had given it. It would have been a 2 or 3 for both. But for Constellars, with my time with the deck over the last month, I give it a 6. And that's a solid number for Constellar. It still loses in positions where better deck choices wouldn't. And then as for Harpies have a lot of utility, and it surprised me actually. And while one of our members, Casey, says he doesn't like Pet Dragon, I actually like Pet Dragon because it can give access to the deck to Big Eye and the upcoming Dragosec. So for the Harpies, the grading would be about a 6 or 7 as well. So they're not going to be your best decks, but they are decks that are kind of new to the TCG that we're starting to get information about and starting to see what the cards are. We have access to them on Dueling Network and we can put them to work. And so those are probably the 2 decks at the moment besides Noble Knights, but I'm really early in my studying and developing of that deck. But Constellar, Harpy, those are the 2 kind of oddball decks I'm working with right now, and I have really good reads and a really good feel about how they are and what they should do.
What about you, Keo? Anything you've been playing that's kind of funky?
Not exactly funky, but it's more about annoying. That is my Watch deck, which generally is focused on direct enemy attack and make sure that opponent doesn't have much response to it.
I like Watts. Watts are fun.
They electrify.
What about your most annoying deck to the Fox, Medicis?
Well, it's on hold. It's still the same build, but it's kind of on hold at the moment because the ultimate offering might be banned, so that's kind of slowed down the deck quite a bit. But overall, it's still pretty decent.
Yeah, I would say that even if it does get banned, and I don't want to get into that too much because it's neither here nor there, it's a one-of, so it really shouldn't affect that deck much. Because you're not going to draw it every game, you're not going to draw it when you want it every game, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, as far as myself, just some funky off-the-wall decks. I've been fiddling with quite a few decks here lately. Tried a Horus deck. Horus has gotten way too slow. Scrapped it. But the ones I've actually seen that have had a little more success would be Vanilla Beat Down, as I've It's called Vanilla Mayhem as I've made more and more changes to it. But yet again, it's another rabbit variant. And
Of course.
Hunter Dragon, and Gen X controller, and like 3 Blue Eyes, and it gives you a lot of options. It's quite the interesting deck, and you can quite literally turn a game around in 1 to 2 turns. Genzo's witnessed a few of the matches playing that.
I can tell you one thing: when Daigoso Emerald gets released in what, 1, 2, 3 months, that's going to be a card that deck loves. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Because you get detach a material and special summon Blue Eyes. What?
Yeah.
Are you running Common Charity in that vanilla deck?
Not that one. I'm running 2.
You need to be, bud. Oh, that's good.
I'm running 2 versions that run Common Charity. Both of them revolve around Exodia. One's running for Exodia, goes into the Slacker Magician and being able to use Exodius to go into the Rail Cannon to do turn damage and to kind of stall out to get into Exodia. And the other one, it uses Dark Greffers to drop Exodia for Necros. Because not a whole lot of players are using like Sola release and such to remove things from the graveyard as they have in past metas. So I've been fiddling a little bit with Necros, but probably the most annoying deck I've been running lately, and this was kind of in response to Keo and his Madolchis. I actually named it Anti-Madolchi. It is just an off-the-wall anti-meta deck that's completely based around removal with DD Warrior Ladies, DD Warriors, DD Assailants, Dimensional Prison, Caius, Blackluster,
Karma Cut?
Envoy. Yeah, Karma Cut.
I like that card.
Everything that removes. Almost everything that removes, you see it in that deck. But I think that's probably been the funkiest things I've been playing with. I've been trying to get a little more back into the competitive. But with me, I like to look for tech cards that people really don't think about, that they don't think they're relevant, and try to find some relevancy for them. But just some quick ending points before we wrap things up tonight. We still have our race to 8,000. Been mentioning that. Got an Exodia mat up for giveaway. Bring your friends. Have them come over. Look around the site. There's lots to offer. I mean, we have our news area, we have our trading section, the midnight market, we have our Yu-Gi-Oh area and the competitive section. You can find information on you can find articles on types, basics in the game, deck help. Keo and Genzo just launched the Midnight Crew area, Pit Crew, where you can go in and make deck requests for decks you want built. Still having our flash tournaments. Right now we're having one for a number 50 Black Ship of Corn. That's usually held on Thursdays, and sign-ups are usually between 7 and 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The next one after that's going to be for an Inzektor Dragonfly mat after we finish up the Black Ship. So chances to win free things just for coming in on Thursdays and playing in our flash tournaments. And for those members that are going to come over from Yu-Gi-Oh! Forums and ETC, of course, they're going to know we're having the Tri-Site tournament coming up. And just for being a member of all 3 boards, you get entered in a raffle for one of 2 prizes. There's going to be a drawing for a Calcujotter There's going to be a drawing for an Inzektor Gigamanus map, and the 2 top players will receive a Prophecy Destroyer tin. So, lots of cool things going on. Tell your friends, bring them over, and I'm sure anybody who comes over will find an area of the board that they just love and want to embrace for their own. But that is it for the Competitive Edge podcast. So this is Midnight Fox and Ginzo
Later.
and Keo signing off.
Good night.